The Galactic Council had not seen a human diplomat in decades. So when Ambassador Eric Klein boarded the transport vessel bound for the Council's sprawling station, a shadow of unease swept across the station's elite corridors. It wasn't the cargo ships or the fleet of Federation warships that worried them. It was the man himself. In a galaxy where species had existed for eons, the idea of humanity sending a diplomat was laughable. But what truly unsettled them was the whispers. The name Baba Yaga had already begun to echo through the hallways of the council chambers. When Klein arrived, it wasn't with fanfare or an entourage of diplomats, only a small detail of human soldiers and an air of quiet confidence. They tried to ignore the rumors, to laugh it off. The humans were known for their tenacity and stubbornness, sure, but Baba Yaga, that name had become the stuff of legends, a name tied to a human who had single-handedly crushed an alliance of 5 galactic species during the War of the Long Night. The stories were grotesque, filled with tales of savage brilliance, of a strategist who would make entire fleets disappear without a trace. But Eric Klein? He was just an ambassador, just a man in a crisp suit with no visible weapons, no sharp edges. What harm could he do? The council's leaders, high and mighty on their thrones, began to feel a strange sense of security. They had lived through the rise and fall of countless empires. Humanity would crumble under the weight of diplomacy. The tension was palpable as the chamber doors slid open, and the human entered. Silence greeted him, but it wasn't one of respect. It was a silence born of suspicion, a silence that screamed, "We are watching you." "Ambassador Klein," the Xanther representative began, his voice a cold rasp, "we appreciate you taking the time to join us, though your sudden arrival has been unexpected." Klein didn't react, standing in front of the grand, circular table that represented the unity of the galaxy's most powerful species. He let the silence stretch. No human had ever been invited to sit at the table, let alone speak. "I'm here to negotiate peace," Klein said quietly, his voice steady but firm. He wasn't here to explain himself, not to the Xanther or anyone else. "Humanity has an offer." There were snickers. The Vasker representative, a towering, reptilian creature, shifted uneasily in his seat. "An offer? You, the human, think you can negotiate with us?" the Vasker sneered. "What makes you think we would trust you?" Klein's lips tightened, but his gaze didn't falter. "I think you'll trust me when you realize what I can do, what we've done, and what we will do." A murmur passed through the chamber. It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't an invitation for negotiation, either. It was the kind of statement that made the council members uneasy, though none of them would admit it. The Ithri delegate, a being of pure thought who had long since lost its physical form, blinked its shifting light patterns in what might have been surprise, or perhaps pity. "We've heard the stories, human. We know the name you carry." For the first time, Klein smiled, a slow, calculating curve of his lips. "You've heard wrong. The stories make me sound like a savage. What you don't understand is this. I didn't start the war. I ended it. And I will end any war you try to start with us." The council members exchanged glances. The name Baba Yaga was more than a title. It was a reputation, one that preceded Klein wherever he went. But the room was silent for a reason. Klein wasn't just any human. He wasn't just an ambassador, either. He was Baba Yaga, and that meant something entirely different. The silence was shattered by the sudden eruption of gunfire, followed by an explosion that rattled the room. The delegate from the Karen system collapsed, a sharp, metallic scent filling the air as the blast pushed the entire table to one side. Chaos ensued as alien dignitaries scrambled to cover. And as the dust settled, all eyes turned to Klein. He stood untouched, not a hair out of place, his hands at his sides. The diplomat's briefcase remained on the table, unscathed. No one saw him move, yet somehow every attacker in the room had been neutralized in an instant. "Well," Klein said, as though nothing had happened, "that was rude." The delegation was frozen. The explosion had been planned, but it had failed miserably. Every alien in the room knew the cost of underestimating the humans now. "Tell your leaders," Klein continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm here for peace. But I don't need it. You do." A silence, so thick you could cut it with a knife, fell over the room. The Galactic Council had underestimated the human diplomat. And now, they were about to learn that underestimating Baba Yaga was a fatal mistake. With a deadly calm, Klein turned to leave the room, his code name echoing in their minds. The Galactic Council had a decision to make: accept the peace offer, or face the wrath of a human they had foolishly dismissed. The Galactic Council had hoped the name Baba Yaga was nothing more than a myth, a terrifying tale to scare children. But as Ambassador Klein stood unscathed amidst the wreckage of the failed assassination attempt, the name began to settle heavily over the room, choking out their arrogance. The ancient stories of this human warrior were no longer just legends. They were a grim reality. It was the Ithri delegate who first broke the silence. He carries the name, and with it, the weight of an empire's destruction. Klein's reputation preceded him, and every word of it was true. He was not just an ambassador. He was a human who ended the War of the Long Night, a conflict that had raged across the galaxy for decades. 5 galactic powers, each with their own vast fleets and armies, had come together to wage war on humanity, certain that their combined strength would crush the upstart species. They were wrong. Klein, once a soldier, turned the tide of the war with brutal efficiency, wiping out entire fleets in a matter of days. They called him Baba Yaga, the boogeyman, a name that struck fear into the hearts of even the most battle-hardened generals. The council tried to push the thought from their minds. He's just one man, they told themselves. But those who knew the truth could not ignore it. The Vaskar delegate leaned forward, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. You say you want peace, human, but we have seen your kind. You speak of peace only when you hold the upper hand. You've crippled our allies. We will not bend to your demands. Klein's expression remained unreadable. His voice was cold, yet calculated. I don't demand anything. I offer you a choice, peace or continue to fight. But know this, whatever you choose, humanity will stand. And we will win. The Xanther representative, who had been silent until now, spoke up. The cost of war has been high for all of us. Perhaps it's time we reconsider the human offer. But the words were laced with hesitation. The Xanther had suffered under the long night of war as well, and Klein's brutal tactics were known to them all. They had never seen a species fight with such raw, ruthless efficiency. Yet, there was a fear beneath their words, a fear that perhaps, despite their might, they were no match for the human. Klein scanned the room, watching as doubt spread among them. He wasn't bluffing. The whispers of Baba Yaga weren't just stories, they were reality, and they were enough to shake the Galactic Council to its core. The name had haunted their dreams, and now, the man who embodied it stood before them, in the flesh. War has already been waged, and your fleets know my power, Klein said, his eyes hardening. The question is no longer whether humanity can fight. The question is whether you're ready to face us again. The room grew colder. Those who had once been the untouchable rulers of the galaxy were now forced to confront a new reality. A reality where humanity had power, where Klein had power. The Karen delegate, her alien form flickering like a dying star, let out a long sigh. The council cannot be intimidated by a single individual, no matter his reputation. We will decide the future, not you. Klein's eyes locked with hers. His voice was low, almost too calm. Then you will decide your destruction. He wasn't here to win a negotiation. He was here to break them, slowly, methodically, until they had no choice but to capitulate. They would either accept his peace offer, or they would learn what happens when you provoke a force that had nothing left to lose. The council leaders exchanged uncertain glances, and Klein could see their resolve beginning to crack. There was only one way to proceed, and they knew it. The galaxy was teetering on the edge, and Klein, the man they had underestimated, was the one holding the knife. Klein turned without another word, leaving the room to stew in its uncertainty. As the doors hissed closed behind him, the council was faced with the undeniable truth. They had just invited war on themselves. Whether they were ready to face it, or the man who embodied its terror, remained to be seen. The moment Klein left the council chamber, The air seemed to grow heavier, as if the very station itself sensed the storm approaching. Whispers spread through the hallways, frantic with fear. Humanity had sent Baba Yaga, and now it was clear that peace wasn't on the table. The Galactic Council had only one option: submit or face the wrath of a warlord who had crushed them once before. The Council knew they couldn't back down now. They were too proud, too powerful. But the problem was Klein wasn't bluffing. His reputation as a warrior wasn't just for show. Every alien in the room understood that the human could, and would, wipe them out if forced. And though they had armies and fleets, none of them had faced a single human force with the sheer devastation Klein was capable of delivering. A message was sent to the galactic powers Klein had once defeated. The Vaskar, the Xanther, the Karen, all the factions Klein had dismantled during the War of the Long Night had received word. Baba Yaga was back, and his only demand was peace. But they weren't about to give in. The Zorith fleet, one of the most technologically advanced in the galaxy, was dispatched to intercept Klein before he could launch a retaliation. They had more ships, more firepower, and the strategic advantage, they believed, to take him down. Yet none of their commanders had ever faced Klein on the battlefield. None of them had known what it meant to fight someone who didn't fear death, someone who had learned to manipulate the very fabric of war itself. It didn't matter that they had more ships. What mattered was they had underestimated the human. As the first Zorith warships approached the human fleet's location, they assumed they had the upper hand. But the human's message had already gone out. Klein had predicted this exact move. The moment the Zorith entered the system, they found themselves trapped in a web of tactical genius. Klein had prepared. A sudden flash of light as a stealth ship, a relic from the War of the Long Night, emerged from behind a nearby moon, unleashing an EMP blast that crippled the Zorith fleet's communications. In seconds, the flagship's command center was rendered useless. The Zorith didn't have the capacity to fight as one unified force. Their fleet scattered, trying to regain their balance. It was then that Klein's fleet struck. A barrage of energy fire from human warships ripped through the scattered Zorith formations, with pinpoint accuracy. There was no hesitation, no mercy. Klein had calculated the exact moment to attack, ensuring the maximum amount of damage with the least amount of effort. Within minutes, half the Zorith fleet had been decimated, their ships left floating in the void. On the Council station, alarms blared. News of the destruction traveled fast, faster than they could process. The Zorith had been humiliated, and Klein hadn't even broken a sweat. He wasn't just a diplomat, he was a strategist, and every move he made had been a calculated part of a larger plan to show the galaxy who truly controlled the future. Inside the Council chamber, the delegates were in a state of shock. The Vaskar representative was shaking, his reptilian form shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "This isn't possible. This shouldn't be happening. We cannot let him win." The Karen delegate, pale as a starless sky, whispered to her peers, "We've underestimated him." The stories, they were true. The Xanther's voice was calm but filled with fear. "The time for talk is over. We must act now, or we risk losing everything." But the truth was inescapable. The Council had misjudged humanity's place in the galaxy. Klein was not just a diplomat. He wasn't a leader in the traditional sense. He was a force of nature. The galaxy could either bend to his will, or it would break. As the Council scrambled to formulate a plan, Klein's voice came over the communication channels. "The galaxy is at a crossroads. Choose wisely. Peace can be yours, or you can face the storm that will destroy you. But know this, I will not wait forever." The destruction of the Zorith fleet was not just a military victory. It was a message, a brutal reminder of the price for underestimating humanity. As the remnants of the Zorith ships drifted in the vacuum of space, the Galactic Council had no choice but to acknowledge the power they had so carelessly dismissed. The question was no longer whether they could stop Klein, it was whether they could survive him. In the Council chambers, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy were present, each one struggling to come to terms with what had just transpired. The Vasker delegate's eyes darted nervously to his fellow counselors, unable to hide his fear. We've let this go too far. He is too dangerous. We cannot allow one human to dictate the fate of the galaxy. The Karen delegate, her normally composed demeanor shaken, shook her head. He's no longer just a threat. He's a reality. His actions have proven he can destroy us all. The question isn't what we can do to stop him, it's how we can survive him. The Xanther, who had remained quiet through most of the discussions, finally spoke. We're dealing with something beyond mere politics. This human, Klein, is a force. A singular entity capable of bringing the full might of humanity down upon us. We cannot continue to ignore him. There was no more talk of diplomacy. The council members, who had once laughed at the idea of negotiating with humanity, now realized they were dealing with something far greater than they had ever imagined. Klein wasn't a mere diplomat. He wasn't here to make peace. He was here to demand it, or else. Back in the heart of the human fleet, Klein stood at the command deck of his flagship, looking out at the vastness of space. His fleet had crippled the Zorith, but this was just the beginning. His objective was clear: force the Galactic Council into submission, not through threats alone, but through calculated demonstrations of power. As he watched his warships move into position, Klein's thoughts were cold and methodical. He had already crippled one enemy fleet with ease, but the Council had resources that could pose a real threat if they unified against him. He would have to play this carefully. A single misstep, and everything he had worked for could fall apart. But he wasn't afraid. He had done the impossible before, and he would do it again. Back at the Council station, the panic was palpable. The Vasker were already making plans to strike back, but the thought of facing Klein on the battlefield was enough to freeze them in their tracks. They had known humans were capable of surviving against impossible odds. But this was different. Klein wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. A message was sent to the human fleet. The Galactic Council demands an audience with Ambassador Klein. Failure to comply will result in further action. Klein received the message without any visible reaction. He knew the Council was scrambling. They were terrified, but they were still powerful. Their fleets could still put up a fight. But what the Council didn't know was that Klein had already anticipated their response. His warships had already placed themselves in positions to neutralize any threats the moment they arose. The time for games is over, Klein muttered to himself. It's time to end this. With the calm precision of a seasoned tactician, Klein ordered his fleet to advance. The Council had a choice: surrender to humanity's terms or risk annihilation. He had already given them the opportunity for peace. Now there would be no more words, only actions. As his flagship powered up its weapons, Klein turned to his closest advisor. "Prepare the message," he said. The advisor nodded, and within moments, the message was broadcast across the galaxy. The galaxy can choose peace, or it can choose to face the wrath of humanity. I give you one final chance to decide. Back at the Council, the silence was deafening. No one spoke, but the decision was clear. Fear had replaced arrogance. Respect had replaced contempt. The Council's leaders sat in stunned silence, knowing they had run out of time. Klein's ultimatum was final, and the fate of the galaxy rested in their hands. The question was no longer whether humanity could conquer the galaxy. It was whether the Council could survive the consequences of denying them. The moment the transmission from Klein's fleet crackled through the Council's communications network, every member knew this was no longer about diplomacy. The message was direct, final. Choose peace or face the consequences. On the station, the atmosphere grew thick with panic. And for the first time since the start of the conflict, the Galactic Council looked vulnerable. The Vasker delegate's claws dug into the table as he gripped it, his body trembling. We can't afford to back down. If we show any sign of weakness now, humanity will grow bolder. The Karen delegate's once proud posture slumped. Bolder? They already control the skies. Klein is the storm. The Xanther, always composed but now clearly on edge, adjusted their luminescent form. It's not just the human, it's the entire species. We've made a grave miscalculation. Humanity will never back down. The question now is whether we want to be destroyed in the process of holding onto our pride, or if we want to find a way out. The truth hung in the air like a suffocating cloud. The galaxy's mightiest powers, those who had once crushed entire civilizations under their collective feet, were now paralyzed by the possibility of a single human with a reputation that surpassed empires. On Klein's flagship, the captain walked quietly into the command center, his expression grim. "Ambassador Klein," he said, "we've intercepted a transmission. It's from within the council. They're planning a strike. They've already set their fleet in motion." Klein's face remained impassive. His reputation wasn't just a tool of diplomacy. It was a weapon. He had anticipated their retaliation, and his calculations were already in motion. His fleet was ready. He had already crippled one of their strongest fleets, and now it was time to make sure the council realized the price of their arrogance. The captain hesitated. "Sir, there's something else. We've detected a rogue signal. It's a command order from within our own fleet." Klein turned slowly to face him. "What kind of order?" "It's a coded message. Orders to deactivate our weapons, to stand down and allow the Council's fleet to reach us unchallenged." Klein's jaw tightened. A traitor in his own ranks? A spy within his inner circle? The implications were dire, but Klein had always known that maintaining control over his forces would require constant vigilance. No one could be trusted completely, not even his closest allies. This betrayal, however, was different. It was planned. The message had been sent by someone high up. The captain's face hardened. "Do you want us to trace the source, sir?" Klein's eyes darkened. "No. I already know who it is." He turned and walked toward the communications console. A few keystrokes later, he was broadcasting across the fleet. "This is Ambassador Klein," he said, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of cold fury. "To the traitor among us, you have chosen to side with those who would see us all destroyed. You think your actions will prevent what's coming, but you are wrong. The fleet will not stand down, and you will never see your betrayal succeed." There was a pause before Klein's voice cut through again, colder than ever. "To the rest of the crew, hear this. Anyone who attempts to thwart my orders will face the consequences. This is no longer about diplomacy. This is about survival. There is no room for weakness, only victory." The transmission ended, and Klein stood motionless. He was alone now, save for his most trusted officers. "Sir," the captain said, "we've isolated the signal. It's coming from within our own flagship, directly from the command bridge." Klein nodded. "Prepare a boarding party. I'll deal with this personally." Back on the council station, the Vasker delegate had called a private meeting. "We cannot trust Klein. His actions are too unpredictable. He is no diplomat, he is a weapon. And now he's shown us just how far he will go to achieve his goals." The Karen, desperate and shaking, responded, "We have no choice. We must strike before he makes another move. We need to cripple his fleet. If we don't act now, he will wipe us all out." The Xanther's voice was steady, but tinged with regret. "There's a problem with that plan. Klein already knows. He anticipated our actions. He's already one step ahead, and now he's closing in. If we push this further, we're committing suicide." They stared at each other in stunned silence. The truth was undeniable. The council had fallen into a trap of their own making, and now the only question that remained was how much they would lose before they were forced to accept Klein's terms. Meanwhile, Klein stood in the heart of his flagship's command bridge. His eyes never left the traitor standing before him, now shackled and kneeling. The traitor had been one of his highest-ranking officers, someone he had trusted. The betrayal had been months in the making, a quiet rut that had spread unnoticed until it was too late. "Why?" Klein asked, his voice barely a whisper. The officer looked up, a mixture of fear and defiance in his eyes. "I believed in peace. I thought the council was right. I thought we could avoid all of this, until I saw what you were willing to do. You made us all believe you were a monster." Klein's lips curled into a grim smile. "You're not wrong, but I didn't make you betray your own people. You chose your side." Klein turned to the captain, nodding. dispose of him. As the traitor was led away, Klein's eyes darkened. The council had one final chance to accept his terms, but if they refused again, there would be no mercy. The galaxy would burn. The message from Klein's fleet wasn't just an ultimatum, it was a countdown. Each passing second brought the Galactic Council closer to the precipice of annihilation. The cold reality was undeniable. The choice was theirs, and it was final. On the station, panic simmered just beneath the surface. Representatives from the various galactic factions no longer argued among themselves. They barely spoke at all. Fear had replaced their usual arrogance, and with every passing moment, the weight of their failure to respond to Klein's demands pressed harder on their shoulders. The Vasker delegate, his green-scaled face twisted in frustration, slammed his fist on the table. "We cannot let this continue. We must act now. He thinks he can manipulate us into submission, but this human is not a god." The Karen delegate, her usually proud voice barely above a whisper, replied, "It's too late. He's already won. You saw what happened to the Zorith fleet. We stand no chance." The room fell silent, as the truth settled over them like a tomb. No one had spoken of it aloud, but they all knew the only way out was to accept Klein's terms, to accept humanity as a force to be reckoned with. The Xanther delegate's glowing form flickered as it spoke. "We have no choice but to negotiate. He's already crippled 2 of our fleets. What's left to lose?" Their eyes turned toward the large screen in the center of the room, where the human fleet loomed in full view. Klein's ship, the Reaper, sat at the center, its dark silhouette ominous against the backdrop of distant stars. It was not just a ship, it was a statement. Humanity had arrived, and it had no plans to leave anytime soon. Klein stood at the helm of his flagship, his gaze fixed on the council station, a distant but tangible target. His message had been clear: peace or ruin. They would either submit to humanity's terms, or the galaxy would be torn apart in a battle that would change everything. He knew the council was on the verge of collapse. The pressure was mounting, but it wasn't over yet. They still had one last chance to make a decision. If they refused him now, there would be no negotiations, no more talks. The galaxy would pay the price for underestimating the human species. His communications officer entered the command deck. "Sir, the council has sent a response. They wish to speak." Klein didn't flinch. He knew this moment was inevitable. He had given them enough time to decide, and now the inevitable choice had arrived. "Patch them through," he said, his voice steady. The council chamber was filled with quiet apprehension as Klein's image appeared on the main screen. His face was unreadable, but his presence was overwhelming. The Vasker delegate took a deep breath, his voice shaking slightly as he addressed the human. We've considered your demands," he began, his tone less certain than before. "And we've come to a conclusion. We accept your terms." Klein's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Wise choice," he replied. "There is no shame in choosing survival. The galaxy can live in peace, but only on humanity's terms." The Xanther, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "We understand. But you must understand, this peace comes at a cost. The reputation you have built, the fear you have instilled, is not something we will forget." "That's the point," Klein answered coldly. "You will remember it, and the next time you think to undermine humanity, you will think twice." The Vasker representative nodded, his face begrudgingly accepting the reality. "The council will give you the resources you demand, but we will expect you to hold up your end of the bargain. This is not a surrender. It is an agreement." Klein didn't respond immediately. He let the silence hang in the air, knowing the weight of his words would sink in. Finally, he nodded. "You've made the right decision," he said, his voice low but unwavering. "Peace has been achieved, but make no mistake, the galaxy has changed, and I will ensure that no one forgets it." As the transmission ended, the delegates in the chamber sat in stunned silence. The weight of their decision was now theirs to carry, but they had chosen survival. They had chosen peace. But the galaxy had not just been saved. It had been forever altered. And Klein, The human diplomat who had once been dismissed as a mere soldier now stood at the center of a new era, an era where humanity would not just survive, but thrive. The galaxy was at peace, *4 now star. But as Klein gazed out at the stars, he knew that peace was a fragile thing. And as long as he was alive, humanity would remain ready, watching, waiting. For the galaxy had learned one thing above all: never underestimate Baba Yaga.